All rise. Court's in session.
Statement show that on March 13th, 2003, David Leith was killed by a single gunshot wound to his forehead.
Knox County 911.
Help me! Help me! My husband's hurt himself.
The report on the 911 call was that he'd shot himself.
Gentleman's laying in a bed, guns laying beside him. Look right here. Here's another hole. He's fired more than once. Look right above his head there. There's also a shot into the bed, which is a little suspicious in itself.
There was more than one shot. And while that's not unheard of, well, it didn't look like a suicide scene.
And the statement show that the person who delivered that fatal blow was the defendant, Raynella Leith.
He was shot almost in the middle of his forehead, but right above his left eye.
There were no signs of forced entry, there were no signs of a struggle, and there was no one else at the residence but the defendant.
Can you connect Raynella to that weapon? Fingerprints?
No.
Anyone see her pick up the gun?
No.
To any of the bullets that were used in that gun?
No.
That's a problem, isn't it, in this case?
Everything good about this woman was twisted. Everything good about this woman was turned around to be evil. There's not any real evidence to suggest a homicide.
And if I were to pull the trigger in this direction, I could strike myself, the left eyebrow. Am I right?
Yes, you could.
There was only one person who wanted to harm David, and at that point it was David. He was acting suicidal.
And he makes his decision, and he takes aim.
He's a great lawyer. He's super prepared, fantastic lawyer, fantastic. He's a bad actor.
I just tried to focus on the evidence and where that was leading me.
It was hard for me to determine
You'll tell me if that's approximately 1 foot.
where we were going with certain things and trying to piece those things together.
Inside each line is an individual stain.
But you're not making a decision just by yourself, you're making a decision as a group.
This is a decision never to be taken lightly, and I assure you that this court takes this responsibility very seriously. As a senior judge, most every case that I try is somewhat controversial. Now, in this case, it's kind of simple. If it was a homicide, did the evidence show that Raynella Leith committed the homicide? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury,
I really could not believe what he was saying as he said it.
You're not quite sure if this is really where this is going.
I personally have studied every shred of evidence or testimony just like you have.
Oh, I gotta breathe.
No matter where we think we're going here, that can't be how this ends.
48 Hours, The Widow on Solway Road.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Inside this courthouse in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Let the record reflect that all the jurors are in the box and all parties are present.
A real-life drama is taking place that rivals any Southern Gothic novel.
I'm Josh Hedrick. We haven't met yet before, have we?
No, we haven't.
It's a pleasure.
This is not a story that would happen in a sleepy New England town. It's too Southern.
He would bring her a rose once a week, and they would go out to dinner.
There is the gentility.
With your permission, I'll remove my coat because I had some difficulty with it previously.
And underneath that very respectable surface, it seems like everything's rotting to the core.
Unless you really know what's inside somebody's mind.
If I were to then place it here,
You don't really know why they do what they do you?
Best-selling author Diane Fanning has written about this case and the players.
This is something that a fiction writer would write about.
give us your name, please, ma'am.
Raynella Leith.
Raynella Leith, a 68-year-old grandmother, is at the center of this extraordinary tale.
Have you decided whether or not you wish to testify in your trial?
I do not wish to testify.
Very well.
You've got an unbelievable character. There were people she knew in college who said, well, she was great, she was a lot of fun, as long as you didn't cross her.
And ever since 2003, the former nurse has been the prime suspect in the death of her second husband, David Leith.
Help me! Help me! My husband's hurt himself!
It was Raynella's 911 call on the morning of March 13, 2003, that sent police rushing to the Leith home.
This is Detective Moyers for the Sheriff's Department. We're out on a possible suicide, gunshot wound.
These are audio and video recordings made by police at the scene.
No signs of a nose or anything laying around anywhere.
Listen to investigators as they begin wondering about that death called in as a suicide.
The gun's laying next to his left hand, which is curled underneath him. We got 3 fired rounds. What I have a problem with is one is where the round's at and the way he's laying. I'm not saying it stinks, I'm just saying it's strange.
Detectives wanted to establish where Raynella had been all morning, and she agreed to talk, the only time she's spoken on the record. She remembers watching television with her husband David that morning before leaving his breakfast on the nightstand.
He kissed me goodbye, and he said, if I'm not here when you get back, I'll be at the Y. I said, okay.
It was close to 9:30, she says, when she headed to the hospital to visit her mother-in-law.
Just call 4th floor. They can tell you better than I can.
When she arrived home shortly after 11, she found her husband laying in a bloody bed with a gunshot to his head.
I could tell something was wrong when I looked at him. I mean, I've worked in the emergency room before. I know.
Where did he keep his gun at?
I don't know where that gun is from. I've never seen that gun in my whole life.
The gun was believed to have belonged to David's parents. David's sudden death left Raynella a grieving widow for the second time. Her first husband, Ed Dossett, had died 11 years earlier. Raynella and Ed met at East Tennessee State University, where she was on the rifle team and studying to be a nurse. He planned to go to law school. What drew those two together?
Raynella was such a confident woman. She had presence. And I think that Ed was really drawn to that.
They married and moved to Ed's 165-acre family farm in the tight-knit community of Solway, just outside Knoxville, where they raised cattle and 3 children, Maggie, Eddie Jr., and Katie.
Raynella was extremely protective of her children.
They became the power couple in town when Ed was elected Knox County District Attorney General. Raynella was director of nursing at Park West Hospital. But their lives took a tragic turn when at the age of 43, Ed was diagnosed with terminal cancer. 9 months later, he died, not from his illness, but in a freak farming accident. But Raynella wasn't a widow for long. 6 months later, she shocked friends and family when she remarried. David Leith was a local barber and Ed Dossett's best friend and neighbor.
She
fix his food and start his car in the morning, and she just treated him like a king.
David's daughter, Cindy Wilkerson, and his cousin Beth Roberts say the whirlwind romance was all the talk in Solway. What do you think he saw in Raynella?
She's charming. I said to my mother I thought he had hit the jackpot with this girl because she was so pretty and so interesting. I just thought this is going to be a great fit.
But Raynella's newfound happiness was short-lived. Less than 2 years after she remarried, her 11-year-old son was killed in a car crash.
She was very sad and very, very heartbroken.
Cindy says she began seeing changes in Raynella and her father's relationship.
They didn't seem as happy as they were when they first got married.
5 years later, more heartbreak. David was hospitalized. He began seeing a neurologist for signs of dementia and depression. In early 2003, Raynella says David's behavior became more erratic. Concerned, she began making notes in a private journal. On January 19th, she wrote, "Dave hateful today. I cried and cried." 3 days later, things hadn't improved. Dave hateful, controlling, his way or no way. I cried. 7 weeks after writing those words, David was dead. What did you think had happened to your dad?
Somebody had shot him, but I knew that he didn't do it.
Do you miss your dad?
Every day.
Every haircut, every styling in the middle chair at this Knoxville barbershop reminds Cindy Wilkerson of her father, David Leith. It's the same chair he used for 39 years.
My dad was fun, loving, caring, and it's a joy to use the same chair he did.
Cindy inherited the chair in 2000 when her father suddenly retired at the age of 54. What he kept secret were all those visits to the neurologist. If he was suicidal over dementia, Cindy never saw it. When Raynella said, "Your dad committed suicide," did you initially think, well, maybe he did, but it's just hard to believe?
No, I never did think that. My dad was scared to death of guns, and I knew that he couldn't have done that.
And Cindy questioned why her right-handed father would have used his left hand to shoot himself above his left eye.
He was totally blind out of that eye.
As her doubts soared, so did her suspicions about her stepmother's role. And she wasn't alone. Within 24 hours, Dr. Darinka Malusnik, the Knox County medical examiner, discounted Raynella's claim of suicide and ruled David Leith's death a homicide. Raynella became the focus of attention. It was clear to David's family what should happen next.
Investigation, indictment, trial.
But it doesn't.
No, not even close.
Remember, Raynella was the widow of a district attorney general. Crime writer and 48 Hours consultant Diane Fanning says that was the problem.
Almost everybody working in that office either worked with Ed, or knew Raynella. There was a conflict of interest.
Finding an outside prosecutor to take the Leith case dragged on. Making things more difficult, no one could figure out the motive.
Murder doesn't always make sense. Cindy was becoming more and more frustrated. She wanted something to be done about her father's murder.
With the criminal case stalled, in March 2006, Cindy filed a civil suit against Raynella to stop her from inheriting David's estate. Prosecutors took notice. 3.5 years after David Leith's death, Raynella was charged with his murder. And that's when old suspicions surfaced about the death of her first husband. Ed Dossett had been found in a field in July 1992, surrounded by his cattle. He had apparently been trampled to death. Did anyone wonder about how Ed Dossett died?
Yes. The reports were an agricultural accident, but some folks in the community had a problem with that scenario. Ed grew up on a farm. For him to have been trampled by his own cattle, that just didn't make sense.
What's more, folks wondered how Ed, weak with cancer and heavily medicated, even managed to get all the way from his house to the cattle.
He died in a way that almost sounded like something you'd hear on a soap opera.
Diane Fanning says there had been a theory going around Solway that Dossett's death was actually about insurance. Raynella and the kids would get a bigger payout if it was an accident instead of cancer. It might have even been Ed Dossett's idea himself, couldn't it have been?
It could have been Ed Dossett's idea, and that's what stopped some of the other people from wanting to pursue it. Because if Ed knew he was about to die, but he wanted his family to be more secure financially, he might have said, take me out there. Let the cows tromp on me.
Nearly a year after Raynella was charged with David Lee's murder, the same medical examiner who ruled that death a homicide reviewed Ed Dossett's file. Dr. Malusnik determined it wasn't cattle that killed him. It was a morphine overdose. It was a huge story. The widow of a district attorney general was now charged with murdering 2 husbands.
Raynella was now being described as a black widow.
Even though she had never gone to trial on any death.
No, it was just suspicions were gathering around her.
Which is why Diane Fanning called her book Her Deadly Web. Is it possible that Raynella Leith is just a very unlucky woman?
Yeah, but coincidence makes me itchy.
Prosecutors decided to try her for David Leith's murder first. In 2009, 6 years after his death, Raynella finally went on trial. But it turns out that was only the beginning. The jury deadlocked.
11-1.
11-1 to convict. The judge was forced to declare a mistrial.
It was here in Knox County, so it wasn't shocking to me.
A year later, Raynella was back in court for trial number 2. The case was the same, but this time jurors were unanimous. Raynella was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison.
I felt like justice had been served, and I was happy.
So were prosecutors. With Raynella behind bars, they dropped the murder charges for the death of her first husband, Ed Dossett, never expecting what came next.
I would describe her as lucky. Very lucky.
After she served 6 years, Raynella's conviction was tossed out. The reason? The trial judge had been seriously impaired with a drug addiction and was kicked off the bench. What was your reaction when you heard the verdict had been overturned?
I was devastated. Couldn't believe it.
14 years after the death of David Leith.
Call the jury in, please.
It's now trial number 3.
Statements show that on March.
And prosecutor Steve Crump's turn to try Raynella Leith. Is there a way to describe this case?
I'm snake bit, because what can go wrong will go wrong.
It's May 2017. Everyone is ready. The trial, one of the last of senior judge Paul Summers' career, is set to begin. First to present, District Attorney General Steve Crump in what all sides hope will be the last trial in this case.
The person who delivered that fatal blow was the defendant, Raynella Leaf.
He argues Raynella's murderous plan unraveled the moment she fired that first shot and missed.
Once she missed, it changed the whole dynamic. She ended his life with that second shot, and then in an attempt to cover up, she fired that third shot to get gunshot residue on him.
You're describing a pretty cold-blooded killer.
Yes, that's what I think she is.
We'll show you what's been marked previously as Exhibit 36 and ask if you can identify that.
For the prosecution, the gun, a Colt .38 police special revolver, reveals some of the most important clues.
May I step down?
Don Carmen is a former Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent.
Like I say, it's a very old, simple firearm, however, very effective.
This picture of the cylinder was taken at the scene. The 3 fired rounds have small indentations, or hammer strikes, in the center of the casing. The unfired rounds do not.
For each particular shot, it goes to the next chamber.
As you look at it right now, it's going clockwise.
Yes, Your Honor.
Prosecutors say that clockwise rotation of the cylinder tells the order of the shots.
The first cartridge fired would be this one. The second would be this one. And the third would be this one.
The first 2 cartridges are from silver Remington bullets. Fragments of those were found in the wall and David Lee's head. But the third is different. It's a gold Winchester found shot through the mattress. If that gold bullet was fired last, as the prosecution believes, that means it came after David Leith was already shot in the head, severing his brainstem. Knox County Medical Examiner Dr. Darinka Malusnik.
Was David Leith in any way capable of any sort of voluntary movement after that bullet transected his brain?
None whatsoever.
Next, prosecutors turn to the blood spatter. These round drops of blood on the wall tell investigators that David's head had to be raised nearly a foot above the mattress when the bullet was fired.
The only way that all of this works together is that if Raynella Leith is standing at the side of the bed and she misses with that first shot, and we know that the first shot was the one that went into the headboard, he raises up, the second shot occurs, and he falls straight back down to where he was found.
You cannot lay in this bed and face that direction and get that blood spatter on the wall. Blood doesn't turn corners.
But the defense insists that the same evidence points to David Leith as the shooter.
Multiple shot suicides are not impossible. They happen.
Raynella's team consists of Knoxville criminal attorney Josh Hedrick, along with Rebecca LeGrand, a Washington, D.C.-based lawyer with a background in science.
She was taking care of a sick husband who she loved. And for that to get twisted into what it did is upsetting. She's got hope that the justice system isn't so broken that it won't eventually realize the truth, which is that she's an innocent woman.
With no clear motive presented by the state, the defense starts with those 3 shots.
Each and every one of these shots could have been accomplished by David Leith himself.
And then raises doubts to Don Carmen about the order of those 3 shots.
You don't know for certain whether the gun was opened or the cartridges manipulated prior to that photo being taken.
I do not.
And as a result, you're unable to say with any degree of scientific certainty what order the shots were fired in.
That's correct, because in my discipline, they would be not testable.
But even if the prosecution's order of shots is correct, Kentucky State Medical Examiner and defense consultant Dr. Greg Davis says David Leith still could have been the shooter.
I'll give it to you. It's unusual. But to say because of that, it has to be a homicide, I just can't go that far. There is a phenomenon called cadaveric spasm where a person can actually, their hands can squeeze immediately upon death.
What would you have ruled this?
I would have ruled this undetermined.
Which is what he believes Dr. Malusnik should have done in this case. Remember, within 24 hours of David Leith's death, Dr. Malusnik called it a homicide. She had not yet seen records from his neurologist or received a complete medical history.
Didn't have toxicology, didn't have ballistics, didn't have medical records. It went from, can we figure out what happened, to, can we prove this was a homicide?
In a previous trial, Dr. Malusnik testified that medications found in David's system would have rendered him, and I quote, incapacitated. In other words, he would have been unable to kill himself. But in trial number 3, Dr. Malusnik did not repeat that claim.
I'm glad that she reassessed and didn't try to make the same claims about toxicology at the 3rd trial, but it's 6 years too late for my client.
Dr. Malusnik declined 48 Hours' request for an interview. But in Raynella's 3rd trial, she stands firm that David Leith's death was a homicide.
I was very confident, and 14 years later, I'm even more so confident, yes.
Dr. Davis, can you say unequivocally that she didn't kill her husband?
No, I cannot.
But there's not enough evidence to say she did.
Right. As a forensic pathologist, at least on the evidence that I've been privy to, there's no way on earth I think she's guilty.
But there is information Dr. Davis was not privy to.
If anybody has any doubts as to whether David was murdered by Raynella, maybe they need to talk to Steve Walker.
Well, I see a killer because she tried to kill me.
In a final and dramatic attempt to convince a jury of suicide, the defense brings the blood-stained bed to the courtroom, still preserved.
If the record could reflect, I'm pointing to the hole in the middle of the headboard.
Defense forensic expert Celia Hartnett
I've marked the portion where
shows jurors how David Leith could have fired all 3 shots.
If I were to lie in bed and I were to aim at my head and pull the trigger and miss high and create this.
Yes.
And then, frustrated that I've missed, sat up and pulled the trigger. It would enter my head here.
Yes.
And then if I fell and my hand squeezed again, it would be consistent with this direction.
Not just with the direction, but also with the distance.
We're not saying we know exactly what happened. We're just saying we know there are multiple ways that all of this makes sense that don't have anything to do with a homicide. There was only one person who wanted to harm David, and at that point it was David. He was acting with his physicians, suicidal.
He's becoming useless. And a proud man doesn't want to be useless.
But for the prosecution, the most incriminating evidence isn't at the crime scene. It's at the barber shop, where Raynella called Cindy Wilkerson on the morning of the shooting. Raynella had already left David at home. She made the call from Park West Hospital, where she was visiting David's mother.
She asked me if I had seen my dad and that he had went to work out on an empty stomach.
Was that normal?
No, she never called me at work.
There was the first indication on March 13th, 2003, that anything was unusual about David Leith.
The prosecution says the call was part of Raynella's elaborate alibi to prove she wasn't at home with David, but they say she miscalculated. Remember, Raynella told police she put breakfast by the bed and left the house around 9:30. she made the call to Cindy just 20 minutes later.
There would have been no reason to say, have you seen him? There would have been no reason to ask if he'd worked out. And there certainly would have been no reason to say he didn't eat his breakfast, because there's no way she could have known that unless she had been there, and unless the only reason she knew he hadn't eaten breakfast was because he was dead.
Have you seen your father today?
That's the question the prosecution wants burned into jurors' minds as both sides make their final case.
It's the only explanation. Raynella Leith is guilty of the first-degree premeditated homicide of David Leith.
We can't say that the facts exclude the theory that David Leith shot himself as I demonstrated for you. Be as diligent as you have been since we started, and to return a verdict of not guilty. Murder David Leith.
As all eyes turn to the jury, there are things about Raynella Leith they'll never hear. They don't know about Ed Dossett, and they don't know about Steve Walker.
I'm a crouton on a real big salad here, and this is a big salad in this town.
Steve Walker's ex-wife was Ed Dossett's secretary. Their relationship, as it turns out, was more than just professional. In 1995, 3 years after Ed's death, Steve found out during divorce proceedings that the son he raised was actually Ed Dossett's biological child. It came as a terrible shock to Steve and Raynella.
I mean, in some ways you felt that you were on her side.
Raynella's, yes, I thought we was on the same team.
He could not have been more wrong. According to a police report filed by Raynella, on the morning of May 26th of that year, she found Steve, quote, acting psychotic near Ed's grave on the farm.
Probably she was trying to piss on my husband's grave.
She told police she began firing warning shots into the ground to chase him away, and that Steve then took the weapon and fled on foot. But when Steve filed his own report, he told a very different story. He says that same morning, Raynella picked him up at the auto shop where he works and drove him to the farm to talk about the affair.
Till I seen the gun, we was as friendly as me and you right now.
When they got to Raynella's barn, Steve says she suddenly pulled out a revolver.
In a police interview, Steve told investigators Raynella then said, "I'll kill you, you son of a bitch, then I'll raise the son."
She had a towel around her hands, and she comes up with it and starts shooting.
But the former marksman missed.
Oh.
Yeah. Steve started running, but tripped and fell.
I'm defenseless. She said, I used to be a better shot than that, but I can hit you from here. And she aimed that gun, and I closed my eyes. She pulled the trigger. I knew I was gone.
But the gun
Click.
was out of bullets.
There's no doubt in my mind. If she hadn't run out of bullets, I'd be dead.
The police believed Steve Walker's story, and Raynella was arrested and charged with attempted murder. But she took a deal and pled guilty to a lesser charge of assault. After 6 years, her record was cleared.
Why would she plead guilty?
It's the same thing I would have told her, is this is a plea that will get expunged. There is no jail time. Take this deal and walk away.
Raynella Leith did walk away.
And I thank you for your time and attention. And Ms. Leith thanks you for your time and attention.
22 years later, she's hoping to walk away again. But as the jurors are ready to have their voices heard,
As jurors, you are the ones that will decide the case.
something happens that no one sees coming.
If you can picture like a cartoon, you know, of someone's jaw hitting the floor.
Thank you.
I really tried to pay attention and took notes, so I was really looking forward to deliberating.
With her daughter by her side, Raynella Leith arrives at court for the final time.
Let the record reflect that all parties are present in the courtroom, including the defendant.
before the jurors can decide her fate. There's just one more piece of business.
If it please the court.
It's a defense motion called a Rule 29.
Pursuant to Rule 29.
A routine request made in nearly every trial to throw out the case for lack of evidence. In most cases, the judge simply denies the motion and gives the jurors the case.
Only two words are required, either motion granted or motion denied.
But then, like so many times in the story of Raynella Leith, something completely unexpected happens.
In short, the state has failed to meet their burden. The defendant's motion for judgment of acquittal is granted. The defendant, Raynella Leith, is not guilty. The case against Raynella Leith is dismissed.
Not guilty. The judge, on his own, acquits Raynella Leith of murder after 14 years of suspicion, 6 years behind bars, and 3 hard-fought trials. Just like that, it's all over. As the defense celebrates,
She's free. She's done. The end.
David Leith's daughter, Cindy, sits stunned. The prosecution does too.
I don't understand it. I don't have an explanation.
And under Tennessee law, there's no appeal either, because the judge made his extremely rare decision before the jury began deliberations.
Put your money where your
These jurors, initially shocked, become angry.
We were just used. I mean, they just used us as set pieces pretty much.
If Judge Summers was so convinced that he was right about the evidence, why not let us deliberate it?
And how do you explain that?
I can't. Only Judge Summers can.
So we asked Judge Summers, now retired, to make his case to 48 hours. And he agreed.
Strictly based on the evidence that I heard on both sides, but particularly on the state side, if I'd have been the district attorney general, I would not have brought the case to trial.
Did you choose to do this, to end this case, to finally end this case?
Yes.
You did?
I did. When I realized the evidence was legally insufficient, I decided to end this case by doing my job and granting the motion for judgment of acquittal.
Judge Summers believed that there was enough evidence for the jury to decide a homicide may have occurred, but he was convinced the prosecution didn't meet its burden to prove that Raynella Leith had the time or the opportunity to commit it.
There was no gunshot residue found on her clothes or around her. She had an alibi that the state could not prove the time of death. The evidence was clearly insufficient to show that she was the perpetrator of the crime. And finally, there was no evidence to show that she was even the last person ever to see David Leith alive.
If you were so sure that there wasn't enough evidence for the jury to convict her beyond a reasonable doubt, wouldn't the jury have come to the same conclusion?
I was simply doing my job, not trying to pass the buck to the jury.
Judges sometimes make these extraordinary decisions when they fear jurors might be swayed by emotion and not evidence. And that may have been a factor in this case. While we will never know for sure what the whole jury would have done, we have a clue.
If you had gotten to vote, how would you have voted?
Guilty.
How would you have voted?
Guilty.
How would you have voted?
Guilty.
Do you feel Raynella Leith got away with murder?
I absolutely feel she got away with murder.
For William McMichael, Jesse Capps, and Michael Persicano, it was the gun that pointed to Raynella as the killer.
There's no way David Leith fired that third shot.
And you don't believe the defense witness who said, well, you can have this spasm after death that pulled the trigger the third time?
That's fantasy.
What most convinced you, Jesse? That this wasn't just a murder, but that Raynella Leith was the one who killed her husband?
When Joshua Hedrick was sitting on that bed and he was twirling that cylinder on that gun, well, a burden to my family. It was just so corny.
A proud man doesn't want to be a burden.
It was fake. He was trying so hard. After that, I was like, all right, they're trying so hard that it's so obvious now.
It wasn't just these three. They say shortly after the judge's decision, a majority of jurors gathered near the courthouse and came to the same conclusion.
Admittedly, they did not deliberate, but they would have found her guilty. Does that make it worse?
Yeah, I guess so in some ways. But in another sense, it tells me I did the right thing. And more importantly, our work as trial attorneys was spot on.
For David Lee's family, it's little consolation.
He stole that verdict from the family, from the prosecution, from the jury. It was a theft.
Some in this town will always call her a black widow, but for Raynella Leith, none of that matters.
Raynella, how do you feel? Do you want to talk to us?
Because as she leaves courtroom number 2,
How are you doing, Raynella?
You guys weren't worried about her before, so leave her alone now.
she walks away a free woman.
Do you have anything
Please
to
leave
say?
my mom alone.
Did it cross your mind you might be letting a killer go free?
You know, there's a difference between being not guilty and being innocent. If the state does not prove its case, they are found not guilty. It doesn't say that they're innocent.
So you're not saying that Raynella Leith is innocent. You're saying not guilty.
There are two entities of which I'm aware that know the answer to that question. One is the good Lord above, and the other one is the defendant, Raynella Leith.
My name is Reggie Reed. Salonia Reed is my mother, and Reginald Reed Sr. is my father. My mother, she was the love of my life, my first love, and I was her everything. It was very rare I wasn't by her side.
Take me back and tell me what you remember about that day.
That day, we went to the mall. That's one of the things to do in Hammond, just go to the mall, even though if you're not buying anything, window shop, if you will. Went to the mall, came home, and my mom went out, and she never came home.
My beeper went off, and it was Reginald. And he asked me, had I seen Salonia? And I said, no, not since yesterday.
I was a patrol officer for the Hammond Police Department. I was dispatched to a missing persons call on Apple Street in Hammond, Louisiana. The complainant, Reginald Reed, explained to me that his wife had left home the night before and had not returned, and he was concerned and wanted to file a missing persons report. I had received a description of the car from Reginald. I started to drive up Range Road, and I noticed the car. Walked up to the car and noticed Salonia's body inside the car. It was very, very, very obvious that she was deceased.
Salonia was 26 years old at the time. When I watched the crime scene video and saw Salonia's body in that car, immediately I was sad, I was mad. It was pretty apparent to me right away that whoever did this homicide hated this woman.
So I called Reginald back. I says, Reginald, have you heard anything? He told me, he said, yes. He said they found her in her car. And he said that she was dead. And that was
I was interviewed after, She was murdered as a 6-year-old.
Okay, can you tell me your name? What's your name?
When I watched that video over and over again,
Okay, the day before Sunday, what did you do?
what I see is a 6-year-old boy that life had been changed. He doesn't understand the magnitude of it yet. And you're asking me, you trying to find out who killed my mother.
Do you remember seeing her leave? You did?
Anytime a young woman Saloni's age is killed the way she's killed, I think most people right away would assume the husband did it, right? And that's the easy way, that's the stereotypical way. But it's also not out of the realm of possibility that this was some killing for another reason.
From that day on, my life changed forever.
It just begs the question, why?
After my mother was murdered, things moved fast. Couldn't really understand, like, why would somebody kill her? Like, what did she do?
It's been decades since Reggie Reed Jr. last saw his mother, Salonia.
I feel like I missed out on a huge part of life that I'll never get back.
Reggie was only 6 years old on August 22nd, 1987. One of the last things he remembers is his mother buying him a chocolate chip cookie here at the Hammond Square Mall in Louisiana. He told police his mother kissed him when she left the house later that night, but the rest, he says, is a blur. When you think about that, what does that feel like?
When I think about how my mother's life was shortened and how my experience was shortened, I feel empty.
If somebody says to you, who was Salonia? What do you say?
If someone asks me who was Salonia, I would say, you're looking at her. Because based on the description, the memories, and what things people have shared, when I look in the mirror, I see my mother.
Reggie's memories are at the heart of the memoir he's written about his mother's murder, The Day My Mother Never Came Home.
Within these pages, you will find the memories of a 6-year-old boy whose mother was murdered, a 15-year-old young man searching for his place in the world without the guidance and encouragement of his mother. The night my mother went out and never came home, life for me and my father was basically flipped upside down.
Charles Muse, now retired, was the police officer who found Salonia's body after taking the initial missing persons report from her husband, Reginald Reed.
Salonia's body was in between the bucket seats of the car with her torso over into the back seat of the car.
She had 16 pinpoint-like stab wounds in her upper torso, shoulder, and neck. Her blouse had been torn off. Her pants had been removed from her. She had been sexually assaulted as well.
Louisiana State Police Lieutenant Barry Ward would eventually be assigned to the case years later. He was only 16 years old when Salonia was murdered.
In 1987, I was a sophomore in Marshall County High School in Western Kentucky.
When he eventually did pick up the case file, he took note of the lack of blood in the car.
It would suggest that she was murdered in another location and then transported to where her body was later discovered at the Johns Curb Market.
That market was about 1.5 miles from the Reed house on Apple Street. At the scene, Officer Muse noticed something else about Salonia's naked body.
I did see a substance that had been placed on the body. It was a white liquid type substance on her torso and stomach area.
Police believe the white lotion may have spelled out a word, but if there was a message, it had become illegible in the Louisiana heat.
The windows were rolled up. It was August at the time. It was very hot out.
Detectives bagged any potential evidence, including the butt of a cigarette. A Winston cigarette. Police canvassed the area, but Ward says they didn't find any eyewitnesses or a murder weapon.
The following day, on Monday the 24th, a neighbor went to his mailbox and discovered a crucifix and a screwdriver.
Given the nature of Salonia's injuries, police at first believed the screwdriver might be the murder weapon, even though it had no visible blood on it. It was early in the investigation, and detectives looked at all the angles, including Salonia's job at Citizens National Bank.
She was a teller in the commercial section. She was described as being polite, kind, had a nice smile.
Here she is, taking part in a community fashion show, just 1 week before her murder. Salonia and Reginald, who was a Marine and later a car salesman, met during their high school years. Salonia was known for being devoted to little Reggie, as everyone called him. But the night she disappeared, she left the 6-year-old at home with his father, according to what Reginald told police.
He and his son, Reginald Jr., were going to stay and play video games while she went out to a local bar with her girlfriend.
Officer Muse interviewed that friend, who denied she and Salonia had plans that night. Reginald told police he suspected Salonia had a boyfriend and admitted he and his wife had personal differences. But Ward says the police found no evidence of an affair.
Based on the research that I had conducted, her coworkers, the people that knew her, said that she just went to work and came home, that she was always seen with her little boy.
The day after her body was found, investigators searched the family home on Apple Street.
The chief of police said that when he went in, it smelled like bleach in the house.
Detectives looked for evidence that Salonia may have been killed there, but all they found was a freshly vacuumed carpet and the gold clasp of a necklace. Reginald gave investigators permission to interview little Reggie, the only other person in the home the night of the murder. In this police video, a detective questions Reggie as his father fidgets with a beanbag intended for his son.
Tell me what you remember about that night.
Reggie Jr. became his father's alibi. The boy said he and his father played video games and then slept together in the same sofa bed on that August night.
Did anybody come over? Did anybody leave? Everybody stayed home that night?
When little Reggie agrees that everybody stayed home, his father looks at him.
Everybody? Everybody stayed home that night?
Don't be afraid. This, when she talk
Dad,
to you.
don't be afraid.
We just talking.
I don't want to talk.
She will ask you just a few more questions.
What's the matter, baby?
He said he didn't want to talk no more.
Oh, you don't want to talk no
It's
more?
just the emotional part of it.
Okay, that's all right. Look, didn't I tell you before that I'm your friend? Oh, he's here, baby. Okay, darling, I won't talk no more. You don't have to.
I just can't imagine what it's like as a 6-year-old to have to sit there and...
Looking at that, it's still hard to believe that that's me. Watching that video just brings back so many questions, and in pain because I see me crying.
In the aftermath of Salonia's murder, her family came forward with more information, some of it directed at one of Reginald's friends, Jimmy Ray Barnes. Turns out, Barnes smoked Winston cigarettes, the same brand found in Salonia's car. And Salonia's sister, Gwen Smith, said that Salonia did not like Jimmy Ray.
Apparently she knew Jimmy Ray's voice because she started screaming, "Come inside, I don't trust him." So she was scared of him.
In the days after Salonia's murder, there was one name police kept hearing: Jimmy Ray Barnes, a friend of Reginald Sr.
Jimmy Ray Barnes was an acquaintance of Reginald Reed. He hung out with him, he worked with him.
Lieutenant Ward learned about a disturbing incident at a local beach where Salonia was swimming with little Reggie just days before the murder.
They were on inner tubes. Jimmy flipped Salonia over. She didn't feel that it was a playful thing. She felt that it was deliberate and intentional. She was not a good swimmer, and she said she struggled to make it to the bank.
The next night, her sister Gwen said Salonia became frightened when a relative who was visiting Salonia spotted Jimmy Ray Barnes near her home.
And she said Salonia went into hysterics like, no, don't go out there, don't go out there.
And within a few moments, Jimmy Ray Barnes walked around the corner of the house. Jimmy told her that he was checking on Salonia, and she ran him off.
Ward would learn that Jimmy Ray, along with Reginald, came under even more scrutiny 2 days after the murder. A witness came forward to say she had seen two men around John's Curb Market on the night Salonia was murdered.
She became suspicious and later wrote down on a piece of scrap paper the license plate. As it turns out, that was the vehicle that Reginald Reed was known to operate in. That was his car.
Some 2 weeks later, police assembled this photo array and showed it to the witness.
The witness identified the driver as Reginald Reed and the passenger as Jimmy Ray Barnes.
Jimmy Ray was given a polygraph test, and police at the time said he passed. But it wasn't long before Jimmy Ray left Hammond. Reginald denied having anything to do with Salonia's murder. But neighbors told police the marriage was troubled. Family members say Salonia had accused her husband of physical abuse, and there was talk of divorce. The police continued investigating, but prosecutors never brought the case to a grand jury.
There's a lot of circumstantial evidence in 1987 that pointed to Reginald Reed and Jimmy Ray Barnes. As far as a smoking gun, it was not there at that time.
I started feeling like nothing was going to be done about her murder, and we would not get justice.
Time passed, and Reginald continued to live in Hammond. He even ran for mayor in 1998.
R.L. Reggie Reed, number 8. You can count on me.
He lost that race, but he and little Reggie stayed in the family home, which today has fallen into disrepair.
So this is it.
What's it like for you to just come back here? I know you don't like to, but what does it feel like?
I feel numb. Yeah, I feel numb. This is where it all started. You know, this is the halls I used to run. This is the TV room. This was the TV room.
When you were playing Nintendo with your father the night that your mother was murdered, was that here?
That was in this room.
Reggie went on to attend college and later got an MBA. He moved out of Hammond and began working for a pharmaceutical company. There were no new developments on his mother's murder until 2011, when Lieutenant Barry Ward of the Louisiana State Police got involved.
After I started interacting with Salonia's family, her sisters, I realized how important it was.
Before Barry Ward came into the picture, I just felt like nobody cared about Salonia's case.
This was just the last opportunity I felt before more witnesses passed away that we would have a chance to find justice for this terrible crime that happened to Salonia.
As far as Ward could determine, the crucifix and screwdriver found within days of the murder led nowhere. But the detective was drawn to several life insurance policies Reginald had taken out on Salonia that paid out more than $700,000. Some of those policies were taken out the same month that Salonia was murdered. Ward wanted to re-interview Reggie Jr. in 2012. Reggie was 31 years old and living in Texas. Ward sent a Texas Ranger to begin the questioning.
He told me why he was here, and it was to discuss my mother's murder.
And the Ranger then told Reggie something he said he'd never heard before.
He was not aware that his father was a suspect in the murder of his mother.
I was like, where's this coming from? Like, it's been over 3 decades. You talking about my dad, like, killed my mom? I'm like, seriously? I remember asking, is there any new evidence that will surface? And it was nothing new.
It's true that the insurance policies had been discovered by the original detectives, but Lieutenant Ward had organized them in a way that he felt was damning. The Texas Ranger asked Reggie about those policies.
He showed me a graph, a timeline that showed these insurance policies that were taken out close to her death.
Did you all of a sudden say, I need to get to the bottom of this, or what?
It was eye-opening, because I'm like, well, that doesn't look good. Well, I gotta learn more, like, what's all this?
Reggie struggled to make sense of it all.
I did talk to my dad about it over the phone, and his response was, he took out policies on everyone.
Reggie said he finds it hard to square what the investigation revealed with the loving father who raised him.
I look back, I'm like, man, he really did do some great stuff for me. He was a great provider.
Ward took a deep dive into the case file and focused on that Winston cigarette butt found in Salonia's car. He sent it out for DNA testing, something that was not widely available in 1987. There was a match in the National Crime DNA Database, CODIS, but not to Jimmy Ray.
It came back to a man by the name of Billy Ray Barnes.
Billy Ray was Jimmy Ray's identical twin brother, and the DNA supervisor had another surprise.
He let me know that identical twins share identical DNA.
Lieutenant Ward decided he had to interview Jimmy Ray, and it turned out that Jimmy Ray had been holding on to some key information all these years.
Jimmy Ray Barnes did tell me that Reginald Reed offered him $50,000 to quote-unquote knock off his wife.
In July 2012, Lieutenant Barry Ward went on the hunt for Jimmy Ray Barnes, who had become a prime suspect in the Salonia Reed murder case after his DNA was linked to the crime scene. Ward found Barnes in the Atlanta area, where he said Barnes told him he'd fled Hammond because he was afraid of Reginald Reed. Barnes said back then he'd been shot at 3 times and hit once in the neck. Barnes suspected the shooter was Reginald, but had no proof.
Jimmy said he was known to carry a gun, but you fast forward 25, now 30 years, Reginald Reed was now an old man.
We're on. Okay.
Barnes was ready to talk about Reed without a lawyer.
I ain't got nothing to hide.
Barnes told Ward that a few days before Salonia was killed, Reed asked him if he would, quote, knock off his wife.
Reginald asked you if you would, quote, by your term, knock off his wife. And that mean, you took that to mean to kill her, to murder her?
Right.
What was your response to that?
Hell no.
Did he discuss any money with you?
Yeah, he discussed money.
Ward pressed Barnes to tell him how much money.
More than $5,000?
Yeah.
More than $10,000?
Yeah.
More than $50,000?
$50,000.
He offered you $50,000?
Yeah.
Is that a guess, or is that the amount he offered?
That was the amount he offered.
But Barnes told Ward that he would not repeat the story in court.
I don't trust the law no more.
Ward confronted Barnes about that polygraph test from the original case file. Barnes allegedly had passed that polygraph, but Ward suspected Jimmy Ray secretly had asked his identical twin, Billy Ray, to take that test.
I talked to Billy, and he said he took that polygraph test. And if Billy looked like you and was questioned over a murder that you took part in, and he doesn't know anything about it, he's probably going to pass that polygraph test. Would that be fair to say?
I don't know. I'm not going to answer that because I know I'm the one who took the polygraph test.
Ward believed he had a solid case to finally bring charges. He had Jimmy Ray's DNA connected to the crime scene and his videotaped statement about Reggie offering him $50,000 to kill Salonia. But, Ward said, prosecutors always wanted more.
I would get phone calls through the years from prosecutors who would ask me to re-interview family members, find out additional information, test more evidence. It was busy work.
Then, in 2018, a newly hired prosecutor, Taylor Anthony, got assigned the case.
Why reopen a 35-year-old case? What was the trigger?
Well, why reopen it? It's an interesting question. This was a case, to me, right away when I looked at it, that there was a story to be told.
Anthony was impressed by all the investigative work done by Lieutenant Ward, so he reached out. But Ward told Anthony he was too busy and that he felt he'd been let down by other prosecutors.
My initial response was to just get this guy off the phone.
He said, look, I've already poured hundreds of man-hours into that case, and y'all didn't do anything. And he said, you're wasting your time, kid. Have a nice life, basically.
But Anthony was undeterred and promised Ward that this time things would be different.
I think he saw what I saw. I think that made all the difference in the world.
Like Ward, Anthony was sure Jimmy Ray Barnes knew a lot more. So he and Ward took a road trip to Atlanta.
And we were able to locate Jimmy. He was staying in a camper at his employer's place. We pulled up early in the morning when the sun was coming up, and he was coming out of this camper, putting a belt in his pants. And he said, hey, who y'all looking for? I said, you, Jimmy. And he goes, oh, you again.
But this time, the new prosecutor had with him an agreement, approved by a judge, giving Barnes complete immunity if he testified to everything he knew about Salonia's murder.
So, to the layperson, you offered him a deal?
So I offered him what I would say would be the golden ticket.
But Barnes rejected the offer.
He did not trust me, he did not believe me, he did not want to talk to us.
Ward and Anthony were about to drive back to Louisiana when Barnes said something that took them by surprise.
As Barry and I were getting back in the car, Jimmy Ray Barnes came over to us and he said, I want you boys to know that I'm the key to it all. And he said, if you think you can indict me for murder, then do it.
Anthony was quick to take him up on that challenge.
A couple of weeks later, grand jury in Tazewell Parish returned second-degree murder indictments for both Reginald Reed and Jimmy Ray Barnes. Immediately, we went to Reginald's home. I knocked on the door, identified who I was, and that I had an arrest warrant for him for the murder of his wife. He really had no emotion.
The date was June 21st, 2019, more than 30 years after Salonia's murder.
When Reginald was arrested, it was like a burden, just kind of my chest, like a burden was lifted off.
I got a call that my father was indicted for second-degree murder and conspiracy, along with a co-defendant for my mother's murder.
Reggie Jr. put up his father's $250,000 bail bond.
My dad being my rock for so many years, I felt the need to try to help him.
Now that you are both adults, did you ever ask him those questions that you have, that you're questioning even now as we sit here?
Yeah, I asked him, and he maintains his innocence.
Sitting in another Hammond jail cell was Jimmy Ray Barnes. He now had a lawyer and asked to speak with Detective Barry Ward and Taylor Anthony.
So Barry and I went and met with him again, And in exchange for him telling us everything he knew, he was offered a deal to plead to accessory after the fact to murder and was given a 5-year prison sentence.
The homicide trial of Reginald Reed was scheduled for November 2022, and Jimmy Ray had agreed to testify. Reggie Jr. hoped to hear never-before-revealed details of what had happened to his mother.
I want to know what happened.
In November 2022, the murder trial of Reginald Reed began in Amite, Louisiana. Reed was represented by the mother and daughter defense team of Vanessa Williams and LaToya Williams-Simon.
What makes you think that he did not murder Salonia?
Their entire case is circumstantial.
Williams-Simon says the state's case was weak. There was no murder weapon, no fingerprints or DNA tying Reed to Salonia's homicide.
I was confused as to how they were really going to prove their case. There's no direct evidence.
But prosecutor Taylor Anthony believed his prosecution would deliver justice to Salonia.
The reason I became a prosecutor is to fight for people like this. I see a woman whose body's been desecrated, violated, mutilated, and nobody spoke up for her and fought for her. And there's a quote that I love, and it goes, "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is the duty of the living to do so for them." And that's my job.
Anthony told jurors about the $700,000 from the insurance policies on Salonia's life.
So what was your theory once you put all these pieces together?
My theory was that Salonia and Reginald were in a marriage that was about to come to an end. There was a history of abuse, and that Salonia was tired of it, and she was ready to leave Reginald. I think he was angry, and he saw an opportunity for some money. I think that's why he killed this woman.
The case that they're presenting, which is this man takes out all these life insurance policies on a young, healthy 26-year-old woman, what is his rationale for having done that?
But they're missing the biggest part of it.
Which
it wasn't just on her. It was on himself. It was on the child. It was family policies. So it's not like he just went and took out policies on Salonia only.
Prosecutor Anthony was frank with jurors, telling them that the state would not produce a murder weapon or the exact location where Salonia was stabbed. He focused on what the prosecution did have, including that white lotion found on Salonia's body.
Later, police were able to find a bottle of lotion in the Reed household that matched that type of lotion that was on her body.
The prosecutor also showed jurors a photograph of some scratches on Reed's neck taken on the day Salonia's body was found.
They wanted to take photographs of his neck, and he was very hesitant.
Anthony said Reed told police 2 different stories about how he got those scratches. But after forensic testing, it was determined that none of Reed's DNA was found under Salonia's fingernails.
They believe that the killer is Mr. Reginald Reed. So anything that goes to contradict that, they're going to completely block out.
Williams-Simon pointed to Jimmy Ray's long criminal record of arrests.
It couldn't be introduced at trial. And the reason why his criminal rap sheet couldn't be introduced at trial is because these aren't convictions.
But Williams-Simon says Jimmy Ray's arrests were for violent crimes.
False imprisonment and aggravated assault, aggravated battery with a dangerous weapon, murder. These are things that the jury had a right to know, but because of the law, they didn't find out.
Jimmy Ray Barnes ultimately took the stand as part of his plea agreement.
Jimmy, will you please tell me?
There were no cameras in the courtroom, so this recording is taken from Barnes's police interview conducted by Ward before the trial. He told the same story when he testified. On the night of the murder, Barnes said he promised to meet Reed in the parking area outside John's Curb Market, where Salonia's body had been found.
Oh, when I got there, he was getting out of the little blue car. The little blue car was parked there.
Barnes said Reginald asked for his help in moving Salonia's body.
I said, no, I wasn't getting involved in that. You know, he wanted me to move the body, and I didn't want to move, and I didn't move the body.
Barnes says that Salonia was fully clothed when he saw her and sitting in the passenger seat.
I did see the body in there, and I panicked.
My understanding after the fact is that Jimmy Ray Barnes talked to Reggie and said, "Where's the money? You told me $50,000. He says he never got a penny of it.
Prosecutor Anthony contends that after the men drove away, Reed returned and staged the crime scene, stripping off Salonia's clothes, covering her with that white lotion, and leaving other evidence to make it appear as a sex crime.
And what does your dad say to that?
He says it's completely BS. He says it's no way. We were at home playing Nintendo.
William Simon had her own theory of what happened that night.
All of the information that we've received about Jimmy Ray Barnes is that he was borderline obsessed with Salonia. I believe that maybe he encountered her, tried to make a pass at her that was rejected, and that's where you see that anger, that rage, that hatred.
Sitting through the trial, Reggie admitted that the relentless focus on his mother's murder was upsetting, especially as he watched that crime scene video, which he had never seen before.
And it really struck a chord by just seeing my mother there, lifeless and just alone and dead.
Reginald Reed never took the stand, and after less than a week of testimony, the case went to the jury. Reggie Jr. braced for the verdict.
As a prosecutor, when the jury deliberates, it's painstaking. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting.
Some of Reginald Reed's brothers and sisters were waiting as well. Kennedy Reed, Belinda Reed Cox, and Claude Reed.
Claude, you don't believe your brother murdered Salonia?
No, I don't. I don't believe Reggie did that.
My brother's not a murderer. He's not.
But on this day, November 18th, 2022, Reginald Reed was found guilty of second-degree murder after the jury deliberated for just over 3 hours.
When he was found guilty, I feel like he died without dying. And I saw myself at that same 6-year-old crying out for my dad as I did in that video. And I just wanted to end.
Reggie tried to recapture the moment his father was found guilty in his book.
My father grabbed me up into a big hug. I wanted to stay there forever. He pulled back for a moment, looked me in the eyes, and kissed me on the forehead. We embraced once more, and then they took him away from me.
I wanted to tell him, I'm sorry for the loss of your mother. I'm sorry for your father going to prison. I can't even imagine the grieving process that he's got to go through.
Reggie says sitting through the trial was excruciating. But when it was over, he still wanted answers.
It's my parents' room.
Lieutenant Ward has told you that one of his theories is that your mother may have been killed in this room.
In this room. I just go back thinking of the manner and the way which she was killed. If she was killed here, how is it possible that they couldn't find anything? Where was I? Did you leave the house after I fell asleep?
Questions Reggie cannot answer because he simply cannot remember. On January 30th, 2023, everyone piled back into the same courtroom where Reginald Reed was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He did not offer any kind of explanation or statement and said nothing.
You know, I want justice, but I didn't think justice was gonna come at the price of my dad going to prison for life.
So my question is, do you believe that your father murdered your mother?
I don't know. Another question, do I think my dad had some involvement? Maybe. I don't know, though. I don't know. So that's where I'm just, it's like a tug-of-war game.
Just knowing the type of father he is, I can't just turn a page and just look at my father as a complete monster.
Salonia's sister, Gwen Smith, always believed Reginald was Salonia's killer. Although she and Reggie Jr. are estranged, she still worries about him.
I just kind of feel bad for him, you know? Because his mom was taken away from him when he was a little boy.
What do you want people to know about this case? If you could sum it up for me.
I know one thing, my brother did not commit this murder.
For Barry Ward, who worked on the Salonia Reed case for a decade, the conviction was just, and he appreciates that Jimmy Ray Barnes agreed to testify.
Jimmy Ray Barnes was the key.
Barnes served his sentence for being an accessory after the fact to murder. He was freed from prison, and shortly after, on January 27, 2024, he was killed in a car accident. He was in Hammond to attend the funeral of his identical twin.
There are several cases throughout my career that stick out to me, and this is probably the main one.
Charles Muse, the Hammond police officer who found Salonia's body, is pleased he got to see the outcome of the case.
I mean, her death, didn't just go in vain. I find some peace in that.
You say that you wish you would have gotten to know her better, but then you realize too, you must, that she's living through you, that she's here because you're here.
Absolutely. And I think about that she's in a place where she's consistently watching over me.
As for Reggie's father, he calls Reggie from a Louisiana state prison once or twice a week.
This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored.
Hey, Reg. Hey.
How you doing, man?
Good, how you?
A 48 Hours producer was present during a recent call.
Do you think you got a fair trial?
No, of course not. Of course not. Wasn't no evidence.
What do you got to tell us about your son?
Oh, remarkable. I thank the Lord for him every day. That he was able to understand something that was going on, but that I would never leave him.
These days, Reggie has his own family. His son Lathan is nearly the age he was when Salonia was killed. And they often play games just as Reggie did with his father. And in January 2024, Reggie and his wife Paula were blessed with a baby girl.
When our daughter was born, we both agreed there's no other name that we should name her except Salonia. Give that name an opportunity to live life and be recognized in a positive way.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Something happened at the house.
We are very worried about your dad.
A daughter's forbidden love.
There's blood everywhere.
Turns deadly.
We found several murder plans.
Who's the mastermind of all of this?
Where were you?
48 Hours is all new. CBS next Saturday, 10/9 Central, and streaming on Paramount+.
This is a case about betrayal, murder, and a cover-up. On April 16, 1960, Irene Goddison went to Sacred Heart Church in McAllen seeking to save her soul. Instead, she was suffocated. And you're going to find out that the man who did this is John Fife.
There may be people who don't understand why an old man is being prosecuted. He looks like everyone's grandfather. But make no mistake, this is an evil man. He was a predator. He was a wolf in priest's clothing.
Looking to attack.
She was not only beautiful physically, she had a beautiful soul. I think she just loved her faith. I don't think she thought of it in terms of, oh, look how religious I am. It was like, this was my life.
Down here, it's a primarily Catholic community, and Easter is the high holiday. Irene on Holy Saturday, with the church packed with everybody trying to cleanse their soul in this confessional, about 7 o'clock, walked in. She would never again be seen leaving that church. They'd later find her body in an irrigation canal, thrown like a piece of trash.
Irene was found 5 days after she disappeared.
And what had the killer done to her?
She was sexually assaulted, physically assaulted, and she died of suffocation. Back then, the church was very powerful. It was unheard of to be accusing a priest. You know, you just didn't do that.
My father, that was a deputy sheriff at that time, he approached his superior and asked him why is nothing being done. And he was told to just step away from the case. Just step away, let us take care of it.
Did the Catholic Church in those days have the power to prevent a suspect in a murder case from being arrested?
Yes.
The case died. It was a cold case. Is this the man that you knew as John Fight?
Yes.
He was perhaps the key witness in the case.
He assaulted her, bound her, and gagged her. As he left, he could hear her saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe."
We got a word for that in Texas.
What's that?
There isn't any forensic evidence that affirmatively linked John Fight to this crime in any way.
You will see her clothing.
Is there any evidence of DNA? The evidence will show you no.
You will see her purse.
Is there any evidence of fingerprints? The evidence will show you no.
You will see her shoes.
There wasn't enough evidence then. There won't be enough evidence now.
I don't expect that there'd be another case like this ever come around in my lifetime. The institution who was in the business of seeking salvation was complicit in covering up this murder. It was a case worth losing. It was worth taking a risk. It's a story that needed to be told.
"48 Hours, Sins of the Father."
Assistant District Attorney Mike Garza is not part of Irene Garza's family, but Irene Garza's story has been part of almost everyone's life in McAllen for generations.
Kind of grew to folklore, kind of grew of legend about a girl that, went to confession and, never left.
The story of the priest accused of killing a parishioner is finally being heard in a courtroom after nearly 60 years.
Does your Catholicism make it more difficult for you to go after this guy?
The church seeks to do good. It's the men in the church and the men at that time that did wrong.
It became clear that on April 16, 1960, John Fight murdered Irene Garza. He did this with malice aforethought.
At 85 years old, former priest John Fight hardly looks like the heartless killer the state says he was in 1960. It was a rainy Easter Sunday. Sylvia Acevedo Stern was then 18 when she received some news about her childhood friend Irene that she has difficulty talking about still.
We were all very scared. And it was just this scary unknown that someone you knew and that you loved
had disappeared.
25-year-old Irene Garza had gone to confession at Sacred Heart Church the night before and had failed to return to her parents' home where she still lived.
That was not like Irene. She checked in all the time.
Parishioners had spotted Irene earlier that night, putting on a lace veil, kneeling in a pew, and in a confession line. But no one ever said they saw her leaving the church grounds.
People remembered her, whether she was your neighbor, whether your wife was jealous of her. People knew her.
Irene had been crowned prom and homecoming queen at the local college and Miss All South Texas Sweetheart. Noemi Ponce Siegler was part of Irene's extended family.
Do you remember how you felt about her? I mean, what she meant to you?
She stood out. She was elegant.
But Irene was far more than just a pretty face. She was a trailblazer, says her cousin, Linda de la Vigna.
She and her sister, Josie, were the first Mexican-American twirlers in history of McAllen High School. And then ultimately she became the drum majorette, the first Mexican-American drum majorette.
Irene had been the first in her family to go to college and graduate school. She became a second-grade teacher and chose to work with McAllen's poorest students.
Oftentimes she would use part of her salary to buy them school supplies, to buy them things that they needed.
And Irene was generous with her own family. Linda was just 9, but she still remembers their last conversation.
She had Easter baskets for us, and my brother and I were excited and jumping up and down because we just knew that she would not have forgotten us.
But before Easter Sunday, Irene had to go to confession at Sacred Heart Church. Religion played a central role in her life.
Every Sunday, she'd go to church?
Every Sunday. Every Saturday, she'd go to confession. It was a little bit of a family thing. Irene's going to confession whether she needs it or not.
When she disappeared, the search for Irene Garza was huge. 70 members of the Hidalgo County Sheriff's Posse, many on horseback, fanned out looking for Irene, and one of them was Noemi's father.
That man wouldn't even sleep trying to find Irene.
Sylvia remained at the Garza home for days after Irene vanished. She says at first everyone tried to hold on to hope. But then Irene's purse was found near a dirt road.
Is this the purse that you recall that was brought to the house?
Yes.
The news only got worse. Just up the road, they found Irene's shoe.
Is that Irene's shoe?
Yes, sir. And the shoe was a killer.
Then, 5 days after she vanished, everyone's worst fear was confirmed when Irene's body was found floating in an irrigation canal.
And I just remember her mother just dissolving. I mean, I just saw her just bending over in pain.
Irene was still partially dressed, but her blouse was unbuttoned and her underwear was missing. The autopsy showed she had been beaten and sexually assaulted.
It showed that she was killed by asphyxiation, probably suffocation.
At first, there were few leads at the crime scene. Just an imprint of Irene's petticoat on the canal bank and a partial heel print from a man's shoe. But 2 weeks later, police discovered a curious clue. They drained the canal, and on the bottom, they found this, a photo slide viewer.
The police turned to the public for help in identifying the owner. 2 days later, they received a note from Father John Fite, a visiting priest from the missionary oblates of Mary Immaculate.
John Fite writes a letter saying that slide viewer belongs to me.
Why in the world would he tell the police, yeah, that's my slide viewer?
I think it was taunting.
Taunting the police.
Taunting the police.
Police only grew more suspicious of the 27-year-old priest when he gave them different stories about that night. At first, he said, he had not heard her confession at all.
He changes it by saying later, I took her confession in the rectory.
And there were other peculiarities. Fite had been staying temporarily at the rectory to help with the busy Easter holiday. But he kept going back to the pastoral house where he lived just a few miles away.
6 times in a 24-hour period. He used excuses like breaking his glasses, needing to get clean clothes, different things that became very suspicious.
And Father Joseph O'Brien, the assistant pastor, told police that Fite had some injuries the night Irene disappeared.
He noticed some scratches on his hands, some scratches that ran vertically down his hands and on the top of his arms.
Father Fite said he had been locked out of the pastoral house and had scratched his hands climbing up to the second-floor balcony.
They were on the back of his hands, and I guess this gentleman climbs the wall like this, but he said he got them climbing a wall.
They had a pretty good case against him. Why wasn't he arrested?
He was protected.
By?
By the hierarchy of the Catholic Church.
It's always been very difficult.
In the days after Irene Garza's murder, Sylvia Acevedo Stern was struggling not just with grief, but also with guilt. On the Saturday she vanished, Irene called Sylvia's house, hoping she could accompany her to confession. But Sylvia wasn't home.
That day might have been different. If I had been with her, she might not have gone to the rectory.
But why had Irene agreed to go to the rectory that night?
Your Honor, at this time, the state of Texas would call Anna Maria Hollingsworth.
A new witness, Anna Maria Hollingsworth, testified that Father Fite had pulled Irene out of the confessional before.
It's not the same, she says, going to confession anymore because I don't get to stay in the confessional.
He had pulled her out of the confessional, told her she was too good to confess in the confessional, and took her to the rectory.
Anna Maria says her friend Irene seemed confused by Fite's insistence. If that's true, why would she have gone with him to the rectory on that Saturday evening?
Because he was a priest, and you didn't fear priests back then. She had no reason to suspect he was going to do something violent or sexual to her.
What angers Mike Garza is that he says the church had warning signs about Fite. Just 3 weeks before Irene was killed, a woman named Maria America Guerra had been attacked in a nearby church.
A man that she had seen came up behind her, tried to stuff a rag in her mouth, threw her to the ground. And at that point, she was able to bite his finger so hard that she tasted blood in her mouth and get away.
Although the church suspected Fite, he was not turned in. Mike Garza says a source told him the solution was to send Fite a few miles away to Irene's family parish. What was the point of that?
I guess to keep an eye on him, I guess to protect him at the time. They certainly weren't going to turn him. To protect him.
So did he behave himself up until the time that you believe he killed Irene Garza?
No. Is that what you looked like when you were about 20 years old?
Yes.
Garza found another new witness, Beatrice Garcia, who says in the weeks before Irene Garza was murdered, she had a bizarre encounter with Father Fite.
I was walking to work. A car approached me, and I said, "Can I help you, sir?" And he said, "I would love to take a picture of you dressed in black by the cemetery."
And that man in the car, who was it?
He was the priest. That's him right there.
He liked a certain look in a woman. You know, America Guerra, Beatriz Garcia, Irene Garza, they all looked the same. America Guerra was a violent attack, and maybe he got a little taste of it then and was looking for his next victim.
And Garza says that victim ended up being Irene. Yet, despite the evidence against Fite at the time, the case seemed to stall. Noemi Ponce Siegler recalls finding her father, one of the original investigators, very upset one day.
I saw him sitting in a chair with a white handkerchief, and he was crying.
Noemi says her father had been told his superiors would take over the investigation. Around that time, Irene's parents got a visit from Father O'Brien of Sacred Heart Church.
The church tried to placate them, saying, you know, even if it is him, we're going to take care of him. He would find justice within the church if it was him.
Irene's family had long suspected that there had been a conspiracy between the authorities and the church to protect Fite. They could never prove it then.
I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 108.
But the state says there is proof now.
I was stunned. I felt like I had a smoking gun at that point.
It's a letter written in 1960 from one church official to another. Garza says this is proof that the church and the Catholic sheriff at the time, E.E. Vickers, conspired to undermine the Irene Garza investigation.
At some point, the sheriff would meet with the DA and explain to them what a weak case they had against him in an effort to get it dropped.
In the letter, they were concerned about how the case might not only affect the church, but also the campaign of Catholic presidential candidate John F. Kennedy.
There are also political implications to this that could make this a juicy scandal for the opposition to Kennedy.
Father Thomas Doyle, a leading expert on clergy abuse, analyzed the letter for the jury.
And I believe I found in every paragraph some element that I found very unusual, but pointed to an attempt to cover this up, to make it go away.
But there was no getting away from Maria America Guerra's accusation because she had identified Fite. A year after Irene's death, he stood trial for attempting to rape Guerra, but the jury deadlocked. Rather than face a second trial, Fite pled no contest in 1962 to a lesser charge, aggravated assault.
And what happened to him?
He was fined $500.
$500.
$500. The state calls Daryl Davis.
And Daryl Davis says he knows how that happened.
And who is that young man standing there?
That's Daryl Davis, Channel 5 News.
Davis is now a local attorney, but back in 1962, he was a young TV reporter who had covered the Maria America Guerra plea in this very courtroom.
That the clock that's on the back of that wall there?
Still there after 57 years.
Davis says around that time, he and several other reporters were summoned to an off-the-record meeting with Robert Lattimore, who was then the district attorney.
He said, we know, verbatim, we know that Father Fite killed Irene Garza. And I remember he said, and the church knows that he killed Irene Garza. So we have made some arrangements.
Davis says in exchange for that plea in the Maria America Guerra case, Fite would not be prosecuted in the Irene Garza case, and the church would send him away.
He said the church is going to put him in a monastery for disturbed or troubled priests, and he will be kept there for the rest of his life.
And so Father Fite disappeared from the area. The case was buried. Irene's parents died without knowing that decades later, it would be brought back to the surface by a former monk.
I covered up the evidence. I'm sorry for what I did.
In the state of Texas, we're called Dale Tashney.
Dale Tashney is 88 years old, a former monk from Oklahoma, and now the star witness at John Fite's murder trial. Tashney has waited years to be able to take the stand.
Do you remember what you were feeling at that moment?
Relief.
Relief.
This was my chance to tell what I knew, what I remembered.
In 2002, 42 years after the murder of Irene Garza, Tashney sent a letter to the San Antonio police saying he had information about the death of an unnamed woman in the 1960s on Easter weekend.
She went to confession to the priest. After hearing her confession, he assaulted her, bound her, and gagged her.
The priest's name was John Fight. The San Antonio police knew nothing about the case, but the Texas Rangers did. It just so happened the cold case had been reopened that year, and Ranger Rudy Jaramillo had been working on it without much luck. And then Dale Tashney came along.
That's a huge break for you.
Right.
Jaramillo got in touch with Tashney and was amazed by what he heard. Even though Tashney didn't know the name of the victim and had the incorrect date and city, Jaramillo was certain Tashney was talking about the murder of Irene Garza. Back in 1963, Tashney was a monk at the Assumption Abbey in Ava, Missouri. He says his superior ordered him to counsel a young priest named John Fight, who had just arrived at the monastery with an unusual story.
I was told that he had killed a woman and then asked if we could see if he would fit in the monastery and possibly become a monk. And I said,
murderer become a monk? Did that seem odd to you?
To me, yes.
Tashney says over the course of many months, Father Fight told him about that attack.
After confession, he took her blouse off. He fondled her breasts, and then after that, he took her down in the basement, and somehow she remained in the basement. I assumed that he tied her up down there.
Tashney says Fight told him he later moved her from the rectory to another location.
The next day, Easter Sunday, I believe it was, and he put her in the bathroom, put her in the tub, and he had put her in a bag or something over her head.
Some sort of a plastic bag?
I don't fully remember, but when he was leaving, he heard her saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." With that, he shut the door and left. When he came back, he opened the bathroom door and she was dead. And then with the body, he dumped the body along the road by a canal.
Despite hearing all this, Tashney says he did not call police then because he felt his only job was to counsel the priest. But it soon became clear that Fight was not a good fit at the Assumption Abbey, and he eventually was sent to another monastery in New Mexico.
Send him out the door,
Yes,
knowing what you knew.
yes. Buried as much of it as I could.
Tashney eventually left the priesthood, got married, and raised a family. But in the early 2000s, he says he had a crisis of conscience and could no longer carry the burden of John Fight's story.
Did you know Irene Garza?
No.
As the jury listened, Tashney shared his story and the pain he felt for denying answers to Irene's family.
Did you know her parents?
No. But I knew she had parents. Can we move on to something else?
But it took 15 years from the time Tashney first came forward to get him in front of a jury. And this man, Rene Guerra, is a big part of the reason why.
But you don't believe Fight ever confessed to him?
I don't believe so.
Guerra was the DA in 2002 when Tashney came forward. He refused to charge Fight. We spoke to him in 2013.
I mean, why would he make up this conversation?
I don't know.
But why? What makes you think he did?
The fact that he had no specifics.
But Tashney was not the only new witness at the time. Ranger Jaramillo had also tracked down Father O'Brien, who said Fite had also admitted guilt to him. Jaramillo recorded an interview with O'Brien in which he matched many of the details in Tashney's account.
Did he put her anywhere to hide her, to place her in anywhere where he might have? You bet so. Did he tell you how he killed her?
She died from the gagging, asphyxiation.
Guerra did not believe Father O'Brien either. He says O'Brien had been diagnosed with a form of dementia.
Is he misunderstanding and fabricating in his mind a story that he might have heard about, might have read about?
Jaramillo felt O'Brien was clear-minded, but Rene Guerra would not bend. Linda de la Viña remembers he confronted her as she and Noemi Ponce Siegler tried to push him to prosecute.
And I'll never forget, he put his finger in my face and said, you know, you'll never get an indictment. You'll get one when pigs fly.
Linda and Noemi refused to back down, and in 2004, Guerra finally seemed to give in to the public pressure, and his office took the case to a grand jury. But jurors would only be given audio tapes and transcripts of what Father O'Brien and Dale Tashney told investigators. They were never called to testify in person.
The charge has been made that you could have called them and that you didn't do it in this case because you didn't want to prosecute this case. Irene Garza's family is saying that's what the police are saying.
There's some interested parties that are saying that.
The grand jury did not charge John Fite, and he continued to live as a free man. He had left the monastery and the priesthood by 1972. He married and became a father and a grandfather, and had worked for decades at a Catholic charity when we found him near his home in Scottsdale, Arizona in 2014.
Sure. Well, let me just ask you straight out. Did you kill Irene Garza?
No.
Do you know who did?
No.
Well, Dale Tashney says that you told him that you did kill her.
Dale is full of
I'm sorry?
Dale is full of
Fite could not have known it then, but his time was running out.
Get lost, brother.
Shortly after our conversation with him, there was a big development in McAllen. Rene Guerra, who had been DA for 32 years, was defeated by Ricardo Rodriguez, who promised to look into the case.
And in February 2016, Fite was arrested and brought back to Texas to stand trial. But after nearly 60 years, is it too late?
After hearing her confession, he assaulted her, bound her.
Dale Tashney's testimony allowed the prosecution to piece together the last hours of Irene Garza's life.
He put the young lady downstairs in the basement of the rectory at that time.
And this is the rectory?
Yes. Prosecutor Mike Garza says because of the rectory's thick walls, nobody would hear sounds of a struggle or any screams for help.
And left her there?
And left her there.
And Garza says Father Fite went back to church to hear confessions. After parishioners left that Holy Saturday, Garza says Fite moved Irene a few miles away to the pastoral house.
Tashney's story was that he had placed her in a bathtub and had left her there while he was going to go back and say Vigil Mass. And at that time, she said, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe."
Garza says when Fite returned from church, Irene was dead.
At the point that he left, we believe she was still alive, but with every intent to kill her. That's a depraved heart. That's a pretty cold heart.
That night, Easter night, Dale Tashney believes Irene was moved one last time.
He put her in a car and put her aside of the road near a canal.
Tashney's testimony has some details, but Mike Garza knows it also has holes.
Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, sir.
In his letter to police in 2002, Tashney said the murder happened in 1962 or 1963 in San Antonio, several years after and more than 200 miles from where Irene Garza's body was found.
Why did you think it was in San Antonio?
Father Fight was from San Antonio. He went to school there.
Did you know what year this had happened?
Since Father Fight came to the monastery in 1963, I thought it happened in 1963.
Did you later find that you were mistaken?
Yes, but I wasn't easily convinced.
Defense attorney Renee Flores believes Ranger Rudy Jaramillo fed facts to Tashney so he could close the case.
Could you have done that? Did you do that?
No, sir.
Jaramillo says he corrected Tashney only because the former monk was racked by guilt, wanted to find Irene's family, and clear his conscience.
I had to set him straight as to when it happened and where.
But the defense says Tashney isn't simply mistaken.
He assaulted her, bound her, and gagged her.
Renee Flores says Tashney is simply lying.
Okay, but you were never told by Father Fight that she had been bound and gagged.
That's correct.
Tashney admits he assumed that because Irene didn't escape from the rectory.
After some time, he placed her in a cellophane bag and put her into a bathtub.
You also talked about a cellophane bag. We know that didn't happen, correct?
No, we don't know that that didn't happen. We know that he didn't tell me it happened.
Well, if he didn't tell you all of these different things, Mr. Tashney, why would you come forward to law enforcement and tell them that he did?
There were reasonable assumptions.
The prosecutors don't think the problems Tashney has with details make him unreliable. And they say much of his testimony is corroborated by what Father O'Brien, who has since died, told the police.
Did he tell you how he killed her?
Well, she died from the gagging and asphyxiation.
But the defense says O'Brien, like Tashney, got help with his story.
I think Joseph O'Brien was fed, given, or confronted with what the investigators believed.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Renee Flores is arguing Fight was never prosecuted because of a lack of evidence, not a conspiracy. And he questions Darrell Davis's testimony about that off-the-record meeting with the prosecutor at the time.
We were talking to the defense attorney, and he doubts this meeting ever really took place.
Really? Well, I'll look him straight in the eye and tell him that I remember it, parts of it, as clear as a bell.
But nobody is clear, according to Flores, on exactly when Irene went missing. He says witnesses saw her on church grounds more than an hour after the prosecutors say she was abducted.
She had been seen at least an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes later.
And if the jurors conclude a priest murdered Irene, Flores wants them to consider a different priest. Father Richard Junius was also hearing confessions at Sacred Heart that day and knew Irene.
Is Father Junius a reasonable other suspect in your mind?
Sure.
Flores says Texas Rangers interviewed Father Junius decades after the crime, and he seemed nervous.
If I recall correctly, Texas Ranger Jaramillo indicated that Richard Junius was not very happy about being interviewed. That suggests something. And why law enforcement ignored it, I don't know.
But Father Junius was never considered a suspect in the case, and he died in 2007, so he can't defend himself. But John Fight can, if he decides to take the stand at his trial.
There are several things I'd like to speak to.
Mr. Fight, would you raise your right hand, sir? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the case now before the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
So help me God.
Very well, sir.
For years, people have been trying to get answers from John Fight about Irene Garza's murder.
There are several things I'd like to speak to.
And it looked like Fight might be considering taking the stand at his trial.
I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place here.
During a break, his attorneys consulted with Fight, who finally announced his decision.
Well, it was a wrestling match between my vanity and common sense, and common sense prevailed.
Mr. Fight, do you wish to testify in your own behalf?
No.
You think he would have been a good witness?
I think he would have been a great witness, but I think that the prosecutor would have done his very best to attack and eat him up.
Please rise for the jury.
With that settled, closing arguments can begin.
May I proceed? Yes, sir. May it please the court.
Prosecutor Mike Garza reminded the jury of the women he says Father Fight preyed upon.
He was a wolf in priest's clothing, waiting to attack. Attacked once, tried to attack again, and finally he got his prey.
Ask yourselves this: what evidence was there that John Fight had any intent to kill? What evidence did you hear? You're here to find facts, and sometimes there just aren't enough to convince beyond a reasonable doubt.
Fight went through the trial alone, without his family. And on December 7th, 2017, after 6 days, the cold case against the former priest was in the hands of the jury.
The jury began their deliberations just this afternoon.
I was confident. I felt we had the right jury in the box.
And that carried you through the first, what, 2 hours of
That carried me probably through the first 2 hours.
And then what happened?
It started taking long.
We received another note from the jury.
And I started losing faith.
After 6.5 hours, there was a verdict.
Would the defendant please stand? We, the jury, find the defendant, John Bernard Fight, guilty of the offense of murder with malice aforethought as charged in...
John Fight, once a cleric, is now a convict.
Guilty.
Tell me what you're feeling.
Justice was served. Irene finally got her day in court, and that's all we ever wanted.
This is what we've been waiting for.
Brought a smile to an old Texas Ranger's face.
Yes, sir.
After 57 years, we have found justice for Irene. And for today, pigs are flying.
Mr. Fight, any words?
No comment. When you heard that Father Fight had finally been convicted, what did that feel like to you, knowing the role you played?
The debt is paid, both to Irene and to Father Fight. Justice has been done for the both of them.
The verdict against John Fight was one thing, but the jury still had to decide on his sentence. Linda and Noemi worried that Fight might be set free.
The jury might decide, because he is older and he's frail, that they would be somewhat lenient.
The morning after the extraordinary verdict, something else extraordinary happened. It snowed here along the border with Mexico as the sentencing process began.
It's snowing outside. Good morning.
And one last time, the lawyers addressed the jury.
It was a time where this man wasn't walking in a walker, where this man wasn't sitting here weak. It was a time when this man was strong.
Prosecutor Mike Garza pulled out the photo of Irene he carried close to his heart throughout the entire trial.
She was a person that was loved. We ask that you assess punishment at 57 years. Every year that he was free, having a family, getting married, hiding behind the protection of the church.
Is it a just penalty to impose a sentence upon a man who is different 60 years later? It's up to you to decide. But do you really think he's going to live 57 years?
4 hours later,
Would the defendant please stand?
the jury announced its decision.
We, the jury, assess punishment and imprisonment for a term of life.
It was a perfect plan. It was a perfect fight. It had the perfect result.
Everybody won.
Except John Fight.
Well, he was the villain. The villain's not supposed to win.
I said, okay, Irene, I know what your message is. We must get back to respecting, caring, and loving each other. That's what we have to do. That's the lesson she taught us. She was so good.
She was and will be my hero.
For Mike Garza, this case tested his trust in the church, but in the end, he kept his faith.
I have crossed the emotional line in this case. This case was very important to me from my heart. I truly believed that faith would win, and it did.